Hi again. Today we'll discuss a book by Colonel Cooper, and this was the first of his books that were an anthology of some of his already previously published writings, plus quite a bit of new material. Previous to this, he had written Cooper on Handguns, which I've reviewed, but as far as I remember, this was his next book. And when it came out, which was about 1980, I think. I bought it straight away. And quite a bit of the material in it is firearms related, which is why I'm reviewing it for this channel. A lot of the material you could say is autobiographical. It's how the Colonel came across different adventures in his life in all sorts of different places. He had an amazing life from early days hunting with his father, World War II, etc. And he could also make almost any trip into an adventure. For example, in the book, he writes about going down into the Grand Canyon with his family, his two young daughters, and his wife. And he went along with a professor of geology who would explain all the strata on the way and so on. So things like that are in the book. A couple of the more relevant to us chapters. One is about the deadly Americans and his thesis that there exists as a sort of hero type in the American culture, real life, numerous fighters who may or may not have been lawmen, but who would fight for their life or for their honor, whether with edged weapons, firearms, or empty hands. And he includes people like Jim Bowie in this, and Wild Bill Hickok and people like that. Really, really interesting chapter on that. A lot about hunting, which is a passion of the Colonel, from the Rhineland to Rhodesia, hunting various animals. And another section when he was teaching down in Central and South America. And there was an incident when he was teaching, I believe, Guatemala, and he started came under surveillance from the local terrorists, and they tried to do a vehicle ambush on him. And it's kind of his thought processes and how he prepared himself. But fortunately, his driver managed to evade them. But it was a pretty tense situation and also really interesting. And then there's another chapter which he entitles Kriegsoberst, which is about Rudel, the German wartime Luftwaffe pilot, who the Colonel met and interviewed in Germany. And Rudel he flew the Stuka Model G, which was an anti-tank aircraft. The Stuka dive bomber at the beginning of the war had seemed to be successful, but then was quickly made, the dive bombing role was obsolete. It delivered a very small bomb, and it was very vulnerable to fighter aircraft. So they came out with the Gustav, the G model, and that had two 37mm cannon under the fuselage. And the idea was to go against the masses of Soviet tanks out on the Eastern Front. And this Rudel did tremendously successfully. And he could swoop down, and you would only get one press of the gun, which would fire 2 rounds, because the two cannon worked in synchronization. And he would pick off a Soviet T-34. And he also sank a battleship with one bomb. And he also shot down several Soviet fighter aircraft using the cannon, which was amazing. After the war, also he got wounded a lot, and he would land and pick up down pilots, cram them into the cockpit, and take off again. And one time when he was shot down, he had to run barefoot for miles and swim um, the various rivers in freezing conditions to get back. So he's a very tough guy as well. And after the war, he trained, amongst others, the Argentinian Air Force or the Naval Air Force. I can't remember which. And I don't know if it's coincidental, but I was recently reading a book about the Harriers in the Falklands, and the Argentinian pilots came across as being very, very skilled, aggressive, and brave. And I don't know if it was the influence of Riddell's training or not. But one thing that Jeff mentions is that Riddell was a completely unreformed Nazi. He had a hatred for communism, hatred for the Russians, and he still was a believer in Hitler. So you've got to offset his accomplishments against that, his ideology. But the chapter is very, very interesting, and Jeff Cooper makes a case for Riddell being the greatest warrior in history. And if you read this, his reasons are pretty good. When I first reviewed the book Fireworks many, many years ago, in the Journal of Practical Shooting here in the UK, I said something to the effect of lend it to your friends, the non-shooters. And I said, we read it because it's Cooper, and they will read it because it's literature. It's extremely well written and very, very descriptive. It makes you want to go out and visit some of the countries he's been to, and an absolute delight to read.